So, I just recently watched a really great movie. It's a Palestinian movie called The Time That Remains, The Chronicle of a Present Absentee. The film was made in 2009, so one has to keep that in mind when they're watching it. It is a semi-autobiographical film written, directed by, and starring Elia Soliman. This is not a conventional film. It is quiet, dark, deadpan, and dystopian. This is a film about how time was stolen, wasted, suspended, and weaponized. It is a meditation on the Palestinians' existence from the Nakba of 1948 to Soliman's present day when filming was taking place. Even though specific political events were taking place in the film, it seems like the fact that it did not end on a specific atrocity, such as the Lebanon War of 2006 or the 2008-2009 Gaza assault, was intentional. For Palestinian history does not resolve, it just continues. Ending on a specific event would have betrayed the point in a sense. It ends with Elia Soliman himself in the present day, alive, silent, watching. No catharsis, no turning point, no after, just continuation. Soliman refuses to timestamp the ending because timestamps imply progress. A powerful statement is being made at the film's end. The Nakba did not end in 1948. It did not end in 1967. It did not end in Oslo. And it doesn't even end when the credits roll. When the story actually begins, it is 1948. After the Nakba, the Palestinians that remain within the newly established state of Israel are labeled present absentee. Soliman's father, Fouad, is being interrogated and surveilled. Survival requires silence, compliance, and constant restraint. This is the beginning of the internal exile. The film is portraying Israeli military rule from about the 1950s up until the present day. Under military occupation, Palestinians are subjected to curfews and strict permits. Resistance is quiet, subtle, and often punished. Humor emerges as a survival mechanism, not entertainment. Life continues in a dystopian loop. Now here's a little bit about the characters. Elia Soliman plays himself as a mostly silent, ghost-like observer. He represents the witness, the survivor, a man born into a catastrophe he did not choose. He is documenting, he does not intervene, and he is powerless to resolve anything. He is not being passive, he is denied agency. Soliman's father, Fouad, is a disciplined, restrained man who chooses survival over heroics. He represents the generation who stayed and refused to be exiled and displaced from their homeland. His quiet dignity is the opposite of the ridiculous caricature terrorist stereotype. Soliman's mother, Thuraya, is strong, sharp, and practical. She is emotionally contained, but visibly exhausted. She represents how Palestinian women are anchors of continuity, which is a huge reason why so many Palestinian women and children were targeted and slaughtered after October 7th and continue to be killed today. Palestinian women absorb trauma so Palestinian men can function and their children can survive. The Israeli soldiers and police are portrayed as incompetent, petty, bored, cruel, and mechanically violent. They represent the banality of a prolonged occupation. They are no evil masterminds, but morons who enforce a violent system without thought. This makes them more frightening, not less so. They come off like psychopaths and sociopaths. There are a few other minor characters who are very symbolic. Soliman's grandparents and his Aunt Nadia, the younger sister of his father, who leaves for Jordan, represents the Palestinians who leave as refugees after the Nakba. Soliman's other aunt, Olga, stays in Palestine like his father. Nadia has a close relationship with Thuraya, Soliman's mother. There are also a few other characters like the lost Iraqi soldier, the Palestinian nun, the Asian domestic helper, helper and the cop domestic helper, and the waving Palestinian man and the whistling Israeli man that will be explained later on. Now I will dive into some key scenes and analyze them. The film opens up with the storm, a catastrophe without explanation. This is a proleptic scene, a flash forward into the present. Suleiman is taking a taxi ride from the airport. Suleiman is silent, causing the driver to feel uneasy and chatty. The storm that breaks out is sudden, disorienting, overwhelming, and impersonal. This mirrors how Palestinians experienced 1948. No warning, no clarity, no explanation, just catastrophic. Storms don't ask permission, they just happen to you. Suleiman opens with confusion and loss of orientation, which is how catastrophe is actually lived. The violence comes later. First comes dislocation. The taxi represents movement, but as a passenger, one is dependent on someone else's route. This makes it the perfect metaphor for Palestinian movement under Israeli control. The storm is chaos, but the taxi is normalization. Suleiman's father, the disciplined engineer. The fact that Suleiman's father, Fouad, is a gunmaker is to push back on the violent terrorist framing of Palestinian and Arab men. Suleiman's father does not make guns for any resistance. He is just an engineer, a craftsman. This shows his discipline and skill. He has competence, control, and skills that the Israelis lack, and this makes him more of a threat. Palestinian resistance is not chaos, it is capability, it is resilience, it is self-determined. His skill and craft is what makes him a target of surveillance and interrogation. Not because he is unhinged, violent, or aggressive, but merely because he is capable without permission. Fouad chooses restraint instead of resistance. The lost Iraqi soldier scene. The random wandering Iraqi soldier wandering the streets is an ironic character who represents a displaced survivor of the US-led war in Iraq. He is carrying the language and costume of liberation after the word has already been emptied of meaning. He is not there to liberate Palestine. He is not even there to liberate Iraq. He is what is left over after liberation fails. So why did Suleiman choose to portray this soldier as Iraqi instead of, say, Palestinian, Lebanese, or another Arab fighter? Because Iraq represents so-called Western humanitarian intervention, which was actually just a U.S. invasion sold as liberation. The reality was mass death followed by chaos, and a society was destroyed with no Western accountability. By placing an Iraqi soldier in Palestine, Suleiman is saying this is what Western-backed liberation actually produces: displaced men wandering through other people's catastrophes. This scene is the bitter joke of so-called liberation. The Iraqi soldier still carries the aesthetic of resistance or liberation, uniform, weapon, posture, but none of its power. The word liberation has been weaponized and is attached to betrayal. Now it wanders aimlessly throughout the streets, meaningless. This Iraqi soldier is not a message. He is evidence. He fits the film's dystopian logic. Soldiers outlive their wars. Violence produces debris, not resolution. The Iraqi soldier is the human debris of empire. He wanders aimlessly because the system that created him has already moved on, abandoned him, and left him behind. He is also proof that liberation can be a lie that ruins multiple countries at once. The scholar's exit. Fouad's companion, who represents Palestinian intellectualism, gives a speech and unalives himself, and the system doesn't even flinch. The scene isn't about glorifying despair. The film is not asking us to admire the act. It is asking us to sit with how a colonial system can produce despair so total that even extreme gestures fail to register. So if anyone was thinking that this scene may be glorifying such an extreme act, know that actually it is the opposite. Remember how the US government, also a colonial power, did and said nothing at all when an airman set himself on fire? Same thing. This film drains the act of meaning. There is no heroism, no disruption, no transformation. The system doesn't respond at all. That's the critique, or the whole point. It's not an endorsement. The occupation. Nadia reads a letter by Thoraya to Fouad. Thoraya tells her fiancé she is leaving for Jordan with her family. She asks him not to resist and to comply with the new regime, the Israelis. Then, Suleiman's cousin comes to inform him that a man was wounded outside. They aid him by forcing their way into an abandoned Palestinian home. The man was stranded because he is from another area and was trying to run from the occupiers and got caught after the curfew was suddenly ordered in that area. This was and still is a common occurrence for Palestinians in occupied territory. The curfews are for Palestinians only, not their European colonizers. The Palestinians are not given the same freedoms of movement as their occupiers. After Suleiman's father assists the man wounded by the Israelis, there is a brief moment where Fouad and Thoraya look at each other before she drives off with her parent. Then the Israelis start shooting at him and his cousin. Fouad chooses to run while his cousin chooses to stay and be arrested for breaking the curfew. Fouad escapes for a moment, but happens upon a group of Israeli soldiers looting a Palestinian home. Palestinian property is being taken openly, and Suleiman's father is observing, powerless. After the Nakba, Palestinian property became lootable, regardless of whose house or shop it was. This highlights how Palestinian ownership is void and Israeli impunity is absolute. Fouad's arrest and interrogation. Fouad is detained and interrogated. He is physically abused, beaten, and then thrown over the wall like he is a disposable piece of garbage. There is no rescue scene, no apology, no accountability. He survives, and life continues. He survives not as a triumph, but as a reminder that Palestinians are subjected to constant brutality without accountability. The Palestinian nun who gives water to the prisoners is symbolic and significant. She represents small kindness, moments of humanity, and gestures of care, yet nothing fundamentally changes. This shatters an illusion of, if good people are present, the system can't be that bad. Because the nun is allowed to move about freely, it may give the false impression that the occupation is not as bad as it is. The nun is just softening up their violence and helping it to continue unchecked in a way, though the nun's intentions are sincere and good. In occupied Palestine, Christian Palestinians were only slightly less persecuted by Israelis than Muslim Palestinians because they needed and still need Western support to exist. But it is known that even to this day, Christian Arabs are treated poorly in occupied Palestine. They are just able to move about more freely than Muslim Palestinian Arabs. The time jumps to when Thoraya and Fouad are married and Suleiman is a child. We learn through Thoraya's letter to Fouad's little sister Nadia that Olga, the other sister, has serious vision problems, which adds some humor a little bit later on. The senile neighbor. Fouad's neighbor is elderly and mentally deteriorating. We know he is not Arab because he mentions this to Fouad later. There is another scene where this neighbor assumes Fouad is Muslim, actually, probably because he just knows he is not Jewish. Fouad chooses not to correct him, and this is intentional because it does not matter. They are all oppressed by the same system because they are Arabs and not Ashkenazi European settlers and colonizers. The neighbor might be a Palestinian Mizrahi Jew. He is probably not Ashkenazi. He is oppressed by the same apartheid system actually, just slightly less so than the Palestinian Christians and even more less so than the Palestinian Muslims. He repeatedly threatens to set himself on fire with gasoline. He does this publicly, loudly, and insistently. He never completes the act though, and Fouad always comes to his aid and redirects him. The other neighbors come to get Fuad to intervene whenever the elderly neighbor does it again. Everyone treats these occurrences as background noise, and life continues unchanged. This elderly man is not a heroic protester, revolutionary, or symbol of noble sacrifice. He represents the psychological endpoint of prolonged occupation when political expression, dignity, and agency have been systematically stripped away and despair becomes repetitive, routine, and ignored. He is what happens after outrage burns out. His lack of lucidity highlights cognitive erosion under long-term stress, a memory fractured by repeated trauma, and the loss of coherent political language over time. This shows what decades of domination does to the mind, sense of future, and the ability to imagine change. Also, the repetition matters more than the act itself. He is not escalating, he is looping. The school days of young Suleiman. The school scenes show how colonial power reproduces itself through education, not just military action. Young Elia is questioned at school. The principal demands to know who told him that the United States are colonizers and imperialists. The question is not whether the statement is true. The concern is where the thought came from. That distinction matters. This is thought policing, not education. The principal is not asking, "Why do you think this?" He is asking, "Who gave you unauthorized knowledge?" That's classic colonial discipline. Suleiman is being punished not just for criticizing Israel, but for recognizing U.S. imperialism, Western power as colonial, and the global system Israel is embedded in. You see, Israel's legitimacy depends heavily on U.S. backing and American military, political, and ideological cover. So, a Palestinian child identifying U.S. imperialism is not just being political, he's seeing the structure too early. That's what actually alarms the institution. The fact that the principal demands a source highlights how colonial systems assume or believe that oppressed people don't produce analysis. Dangerous ideas must be imported, and political awareness is contamination. The principal assumes you didn't come up with this yourself. It also reveals how this could come back on Suleiman's father. This militarized police state is also using children to surveil their parents and families unwittingly. By interrogating random thoughts and opinions a child may blurt out, as children often do. Also, this reveals how Palestinian political consciousness is treated as a disciplinary problem from childhood. The occupation doesn't wait for adulthood, it attempts to intervene early. The Arab and Israeli children singing together in Hebrew also felt weird, dystopian, awkward, and unsettling. One would want it to feel harmonious, joyful, and adorable, but it doesn't. The scene deeply unsettles a lot of people, as it should. The song the children are singing is about Israel occupying and taking over the land of the Palestinians. The atmosphere is rigid, staged, artificial. The children are obedient, expressionless, synchronized. It looks like coexistence on the surface, but it actually feels like a nightmare. Creepy. This is forced harmony. Palestinian children are being required to sing the state's narrative, participate in their own erasure, and all while expressing gratitude and belonging. It's gross. All the children are also aggressively waving the Israeli flag at the start of the scene as people arrive to the school event. This really feels like assimilation under domination. Colonial education loves songs. Think about all the nationalistic, colonial, imperialist songs we had to sing in American schools. They teach you who belongs, who is central, and who must adapt. Children aren't singing joyfully, they're singing correctly. This is important. And it is so sad to see the Arab children so compliant. This is how erasure happens. This is colonial education in its purest form. The state defines reality. Your job is to fit into it. These school scenes are some of the most political in the film. The occupation does not control land and bodies. It controls language, memory, and imagination. Aunt Olga's lentils. Aunt Olga keeps sending lentils with Aliyah to his home as an after-school snack for him. In peaceful and prosperous parts of the world, the lentils would probably be some yummy, freshly baked cookies or something. Lentils are so ordinary. No one reacts with gratitude or drama. In fact, Aaliyah does what my youngest son does with lentils, chucks them in the trash can. Life continues. Lentils are cheap, filling, and long-lasting. They're not festive or indulgent. They are what you eat when life is about survival, not pleasure. Suleiman is showing this cuisine of survival, the food of people who plan for scarcity, disruption, and uncertainty. All right, now let's talk about Ben-Hur being shown to the kids in school. An almost blind Aunt Olga, who happens to be the children's teacher too, shows the film Ben-Hur to her students, including the young Suleiman. Apparently, this film is part of the school's curricula, which is disturbing nowadays. The epic biblical Hollywood classic is about Roman oppression, Jewish suffering, moral righteousness, and redemption through endurance and faith. Something that the Palestinians have actually embodied throughout their occupation. Suleiman knows exactly what he is doing here. Ben-Hur is a foundational, Zionist-friendly Western myth. Ben-Hur was embraced for decades in Israeli and Western contexts because it centers Jewish suffering under empire, frames Jews as the righteous victims of history, presents liberation as morally inevitable, and positions violence as justified when done by the right people. Showing Ben-Hur to Palestinian children is not neutral education. It's ideological conditioning. The children watching the film are Palestinian Arabs living under Zionist Israeli domination, yet they are being taught to emotionally identify with Jewish suffering under Rome, Jewish righteousness, and Jewish historical victimhood, while their own oppression by the Zionist colonizers is ongoing and ignored. The message being taught is oppression is real, but it belongs to this history, not yours. That's psychological displacement. And Suleiman isn't just critiquing Israel, he's critiquing Hollywood and Western soft power. Basically, the Palestinian kids are taught that some suffering is epic, some suffering doesn't count. This ties directly to the principle demanding to know who told child Suleiman the US is imperialist. By the way, I lost it when Aunt Olga realized the actors were making out on screen, and she jumps up to try to cover up the situation and explains it away by saying they are like brother and sister, which makes it appear even worse. The bridge rescue scene. The moment Suleiman's father saves an Israeli soldier on the bridge is one of the film's most morally devastating reversals. Even though he prevents the soldier from dying, there is no reward, no recognition, and no protection granted afterward. The act changes nothing about how the system treats him. He is still surveilled, still beaten, and still treated as disposable. His humanity does not protect him. This exposes the lie that good behavior earns safety under occupation. What this shows is that Palestinian humanity is real, constant, and utterly irrelevant to how power operates. The middle of the night harassments from the Israeli police. One of the most unsettling things the film shows is how Israeli police show up at Suleiman's family home in the middle of the night. There is no emergency or explanation, just pounding on the doors, waking people up. Over time, that kind of intrusion wears people down. The goal isn't information, it's exhaustion. It is purely power flex and harassment. Fuad tells one of the officers he isn't even ashamed of himself. Perhaps this officer is a Palestinian Arab giving the job for his ability to speak Arabic. This officer does look ashamed, especially when one of the Israeli officers brings a pan of bulgur that he found under Elia's bed and claims that it is gunpowder that he found. The Arab officer even explains it is bulgur, but the other Israeli officers either either don't care and or they want any excuse to interrogate Fuad. This shows how the Israeli police are dangerous caricatures and at the very least extremely dumb. By the way, the reason why Palestinians hid bulgur under beds and other dry staples similar to this is because during raids, the police would rummage through cabinets, like in the kitchen and stuff, and would dump out all these messy, small particle foods just to be assholes, to make a huge mess and to ruin the people's food that they feed their children and stuff with. Really disgusting. This might be lost on Western folks, like why they would even put that under the bed, but that's why. Then we have another time jump. Olga's blindness gets worse, and Elia has grown into a teenager who occasionally gets into a bit of trouble with small acts of resistance. For example, like tearing up an Israeli flag. This is stuff that we take for granted here in the United States. We can actually burn an American flag here, and legally nothing is supposed to happen to us. At least that is how things are now. There are people who are saying that people should go to prison for burning flags, but, you know, a lot of Americans think that's bullshit. You shouldn't go to prison for burning any flag. Suleiman's antics do catch up with him, though, and he ends up being banished from Nazareth and Israel entirely. His mom barely reacts. She is so exhausted. Then there is another time jump, and Elia returns from overseas as an adult. It seems that the Israeli suspended his exile, probably because his mother is elderly and needs someone to look after her. Elia is her only child, and the state probably does not want the burden of looking after an Arab Palestinian. It's probably not like they forgave him and rescinded his exile or banishment or whatever you want to call it out of the goodness of their hearts. The Christmas tree. At some point, we see a Christmas tree in Suleiman's family home. This was intentionally shown so late in the film for a reason. Suleiman and his family are Palestinian, Arab, and Christian. All Palestinian Arabs were considered dangerous threats to the Israeli government, and all of them suffered under Israeli occupation. And actually, they still do to this day. The random Israeli cop. Now, let's talk about this guy. This random Israeli cop who brings Suleiman some tabbouleh the moment he arrives back home from his so-called banishment or exile is interesting. Tabbouleh is significant here. It is a very recognizable Palestinian dish, and tabbouleh isn't neutral. When an Ashkenazi European Zionist cop brings it, the message isn't, I care. It's more like, I know your world. I can step into it whenever I want. I can eat your food. I can joke with you. I can even be nice to you, but I can still enforce the system that controls you. Suleiman doesn't react because reacting either way would be a trap. Gratitude would imply consent. Refusal would escalate risk. Suleiman does what he always does. He absorbs the moment and moves on. The domestic helpers. The Israeli cop cleaning Suleiman's home is very abnormal and out of place. The other domestic helper, the woman who's probably from Central or East Asia, is actually quite normal. These domestic workers can be found in many West Asian homes. You do not even have to be a rich person to hire domestic help in Asia and Africa. It's about as commonplace there as hiring someone to cut your lawn in the United States. The Israeli cop cleaning Suleiman's home isn't out of some kind of kindness, guilt, or reconciliation. It's about power crossing boundaries. In any normal situation, a police officer cleaning someone's home would be absurd. Under occupation, it becomes disturbing because it says, I don't just control public space, I can enter your private life and redefine the rules whenever I want. This cleaning is a display of dominance, not humility. So why? The cop can leave whenever he wants. Suleiman cannot ask him to leave safely. Refusal or protest carries risk, and the officer's presence is not neutral. Even helpful actions happen on the occupier's terms. It is like Suleiman is asking, what does it mean when power enters your home and starts rearranging it? even helping without ever asking. In areas under Israeli control, especially where Palestinians live, homes can be occupied by police or military and turned into a base of operations whenever they want. This scene is making a mockery of that. The Asian domestic helper is actually there with consent. She is legitimately performing a service as a caretaker to Suleiman's elderly mother. She might even be like some kind of like geriatric nurse or something, you know? And even she seems disturbed and annoyed by the Israeli cops' presence there. The slap scene that some Western folks might not get. In some Arab cultures, smacks and kisses on the cheeks are the normal way men greet each other, but this scene exaggerates it a bit for laughs. There is nothing romantic about this at all. In fact, Arab men are so secure in their masculinity that they really don't care what insecure Western men think about their custom. Then there's this guy outside the cafe, perhaps a fellow Palestinian, who waves at Suleiman and his friends, except it's not clear he's waving at them. And then a second later, he's still waving, seemingly in the air. It's funny at first, like, buddy, the moment has passed. But that's the joke, I think. He's not confused. He's rehearsing normal human interaction in a place where connection has been lost. Under occupation, even basic social gestures can churn into muscle memory. Then another guy approaches, the exact opposite of the previous one. He's relaxed, whistling, comfortable in this public space. He approaches without hesitation and behaves like someone who belongs, socially and politically. This one is obviously an Israeli. Let's talk about the scenes of Suleiman staring at his mother. Suleiman stares at his mother because she's the center of gravity of his world, emotionally, historically, and politically, and because looking is the only thing he can still do for her. By the point in the film when Suleiman is often staring at his mother, time has already done its damage. His father is gone, the past is gone, and his mother's body is failing. He can't stop any of it, so he watches. Thuraya isn't just his mother, she's a whole generation. She lived through the Nakba of 1948, military rule, and constant surveillance. He's bearing witness to what history actually does to people. Suleiman stares at his mother because she carries everything the film is about. Time, loss, the "My Heart Will Go On" karaoke scene. Suleiman's domestic helper is singing a karaoke song to Suleiman's mom and the Israeli cop. It seems random, but I actually think it is one of Suleiman's smartest jokes. This annoying out-of-place song is the ultimate over-the-top, global, emotional power ballad, so already we're in absurd territory. Huge romantic song about eternal love, about destiny and distance, dropped into Suleiman's flat, restrained, deadpan world. Absolutely. This song is about separation, longing, and believing in connection despite distance. In other words, a love song built entirely on absence. For Palestinians, near and far aren't poetic metaphors, they're political realities. A family a few miles away you can't reach, and places you can see but not enter. Plus, karaoke is imitation, borrowed emotion, and prepackaged feeling. You're not singing your story, you're performing someone else's. This highlights how Palestinians are forced to live inside narratives that aren't theirs. Western stories, Western emotions, and Western soundtracks. But it's sad because this kind of exaggerated, imported emotion is safer than expressing the real thing. Real longing for home, freedom, and return is very dangerous. Celine Dion is allowed. And this song is probably relatable to the domestic helper because she too is living far from her family. Most likely she is working there to send money back home to her parents or even children if she has any. And yeah, it's probably one of those moments where Suleiman basically shrugs and says, see, even Celine Dion gets it by accident. The taxi pile-up scene. This scene is all about humiliation, crowding, and loss of control. A shared taxi keeps taking on more and more passengers. People are piling in nearly on top of each other. There's no personal space. As they all ride along, a postcard-like image of a nude woman, or like a pinup model of some sort, keeps getting accidentally revealed and covered again as the visor of the car flips up and down. No one acknowledges it directly, but you get a sense that it is awkward, uncomfortable, and absurd, all by design. People are forced into shared, uncomfortable spaces because there are no alternatives. Some conservative viewers in Eastern countries may get hung up on the image of the nude woman, and some pretty liberal Western folks may not even get the point of it because they might be culturally desensitized to nudity. This scene is so clever in that way because it makes it weird for everyone. The thing is, the exposed woman is not interacting with anyone. She's not eroticized by the camera and not treated as a spectacle. Instead, her repeated exposure is embarrassing and even funny in a dark humor way. The image represents loss of dignity, bodies being exposed to others without consent, and humiliation that happens casually. No one in the taxi comments on it, makes a joke, or even acknowledges it, because under normalized pressure, discomfort becomes background noise, humiliation becomes routine, and reacting would only make things worse and more uncomfortable. It's funny in the way Suleiman's humor always is, exaggerated just enough to notice, all while being uncomfortable and awkward. This taxi scene is about compression and humiliation. People are packed into a space they don't control, while dignity keeps slipping in and out of view without anyone being able to stop it. I actually laughed really hard at this scene, and also the one where the guy jumps out of the car in the middle of the busy street to greet the traffic conductor. That's like so polychronic. Meanwhile, you see the militarized police state in action in the next street over, essentially. This is what the United States might have to look forward to, by the way, if people don't prevent it. I also thought it interesting how the Israeli soldier thugs were shoving their gun in the woman pushing the baby stroller's face, barking at her to go home. And it was interesting how the Palestinian riders paused and waited for her to leave the area before continuing their riot. I also like how the woman told the soldiers to go home. She meant their real home, as in Poland or like Russia or something like that. And the absolute absurdity of a massive Israeli tank harassing just some dude taking out the garbage. That is the disgusting and absurd reality of Palestinians to this day. Then there's the apartheid wall scene. The apartheid wall represents physical separation, political domination, and bureaucratic reality turned into concrete. Near versus far, visible versus reachable, allowed versus forbidden. By the time Suleiman approaches it, we already know this wall shapes everything. Suleiman also goes over the wall and not through it. He doesn't pass through a checkpoint. He doesn't get permission. He doesn't solve the problem. Catapulting over it is quiet and unspectacular. There's no triumph, no celebration, no relief, because the wall is not the only barrier. The system still exists. The power imbalance remains. The condition continues. Palestinians are not trapped because they cannot cross walls. They are trapped because the wall is only one part of the whole oppressive system. You can cross a barrier and still not be free. You can move and still be contained. You can leave and still carry this condition with you. Now let's talk about the style of the film and like the tone of the film. The tone of this film is dark and contains deadpan humor throughout. There is very little dialogue, long static shots, and emotions are expressed through silence and framing. Palestinians are expected to be silent. Their suffering is invisible intentionally. The film refuses to emotionally beg its audience and to set dignity aside. The soldiers' behaviors are absurd and idiotic. Their authority is ridiculous and also very dangerous. Most violence is implied but not shown in this film. Humor is used as a form of resistance in this film. It says, you can control our lives, but you cannot control the way we see you. The film's style was inspired by Buster Keaton and Jacques Tati and silent cinema. Suleiman's stillness contrasts with the constant intrusion by the occupying state. In their world, Palestinians are often framed as small figures inside controlled spaces. This film focuses on Palestinians who stayed, and how staying is a form of resistance, and how their very existence is seen as a problem by the occupiers. The film itself exposes how time is used as a weapon. Endless waiting, delays, bureaucracy, curfews, endless conditions. Time is not something neutral. It is used to exhaust, erode, and normalize injustice. Israeli authority is revealed as arbitrary, overbearing, incompetent, and violent. The film strips Israeli power of any moral legitimacy by exposing how stupid and petty it often is. Palestinians are often spoken about, but rarely allowed to speak. Suleiman has created a film that refuses to explain, forcing the viewer to sit in awkward silence instead of being guided. This film rejects slogan, propaganda, and spectacle. It refuses to perform Palestinian pain for Western consumption, which is the source of their pain and suffering, by the way. This film documents everyday life, not just moments of crises. This film is all about resistance, Palestinian longevity, and endurance, and how they simply refuse to just go away, die, or be erased. The time that remains is about living within an atrocious catastrophe that has never ended and still endures to this day. Some of the Western audience might not get the time that remains because it refuses to obey Western narrative, moral, and emotional expectations, and those expectations are deeply political. Most Western viewers are trained by Hollywood to recognize injustice only when it looks like explosions, villains monologuing, heroic resistance, and clear moral turning points. Suleiman provides paperwork, waiting, silence, humiliation, and repetition. What's happening is that system is working exactly as designed. Occupation isn't a single event. It's a condition. Western audiences expect Palestinians to explain themselves. Western audiences are used to marginalized people performing trauma and emotional accessibility. They expect speeches, tears, context, and reassurance. Also, Western audiences are so desensitized to violence and atrocity that many cannot look deep and peel back layers to discover what is underneath the surface. Suleiman refuses to give the Western audience what it feels entitled to. Palestinians do not owe an explanation for their own dispossession. This makes Western viewers uncomfortable. They have to sit without knowing. Western audiences often ask, why doesn't he do anything? Because doing something loudly gets you killed under occupation. The film understands that. Many viewers might not understand that. Western viewers are trained and conditioned to be colonist apologists and constantly want both sides in order to justify it in their minds and to diminish Palestinian right to resist said occupation and colonization. A huge reason why a good number of Western people don't get this film is that it refuses false balance. There is no Israeli moral crises, no explanation of security concerns, and no apology for Palestinian anger and humor. To Western liberal sensibilities, which are often hypocritical and conditional, that feels biased. In actuality, colonial violence does not require equal screen time. Suleiman is not debating. He's documenting. Also, the gut punch is that this film exposes Western complicity and responsibility for the ongoing atrocity that is the Israeli occupation. Western audiences don't like sitting with guilt, being called out, and being strongly criticized like this. The film does not guide your emotions. It does not tell you how to feel. It does not absolve you. It reflects internal spectatorship, Western political inaction, endless concern without consequence. Some viewers feel accused, even if they aren't explicitly blamed. This film does not cast the West as the savior, the helper, the mediator, or the enlightened observer. It casts the viewer itself as the watcher, a bystander, and someone who knows and does nothing. The truth hurts more than anything else, and that also makes this film extremely uncomfortable, which was the point. So when critics say things like, I did not connect with it, it probably means something more like, it did not make me feel good about myself. What this film wants to ask the Western viewer is, can you listen for once without being centered? Most can't, which is why this film won't be understood by everyone. A lot of Western audiences don't get The Time That Remains because it doesn't behave like a Western political film. It doesn't explain, flatter, or resolve. It documents a system that never ended, and it leaves the viewer stuck in the same discomfort Palestinians live with every day. The film ends with some young resistors throwing up victory signs and a techno remix of the song Staying Alive. If any of our viewers have seen this film, please tell us what you thought about it in the comments. And also tell us your favorite parts and which parts you thought were funny or anything like that. Let's discuss it in the comments down below. Thanks for listening.